Martin Lehr is no stranger to the Life Science Connect community. He's a member of the Life Science Leader Editorial Advisory Board, and his opinions and insights are frequently featured in the magazine. Martin is a research biologist turned venture capitalist turned founder and CEO of clinical stage Context Therapeutics, and he's my guest on today's episode of The Business of Biotech. Martin, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's my pleasure to have you. So today, Marty and I are going to talk about the work that Context is doing in women's health, and more specifically, how the company is structured to create efficiencies in the development of therapies for hormone-driven breast and gynecological cancers. But first, I want to get to know Martin a little bit better. So let's dial the time machine back a little bit, Marty, and I want to kind of get a sense of your career trajectory, starting with the very beginning. So you came out of Columbia. You were a biology guy. Like you majored in biotech, right? Biologic engineering.
A fancy way of saying molecular biology.
Okay. Yeah. So molecular biology guy, you went to work as a researcher at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and then Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. And then there seems to be this like hard right turn into venture capital shortly after that experience in research. So tell me about that. Like, what motivated the transition from, being a molecular biologist, a researcher, to kind of taking that hard turn into the VC world?
Yeah, it was an interesting time for me. So while I loved research, I didn't have the greatest hands in the world. And so I wasn't a particularly good or productive researcher, which made me reevaluate a career in bench research. At the time, there was a new venture capital fund forming in Philadelphia. While I was living in New York, I'm a Philadelphia native, and so I was considering moving back home. And the fund was called Osage University Partners. It had just formed. The idea was to invest in early stage academic technologies that were spinning out of universities. And I thought that was fascinating. I was doing research at the time at a medical research institution. And so for me, the type of companies, ideas, concepts they were looking at was very consistent with the journal articles that I was reading on a day-to-day basis. And so I really didn't know what venture capital was. The fund, to be frank, was hiring. And so I thought, I'll give it a try. And I suppose the interview went well. And before I knew it, I was working there. And so in many respects, fell into venture capital. There was no grand plan or strategy to end up there.
Yeah.
Ended up being really fortuitous. It was a tremendous opportunity. I spent many years there, basically scouring universities across the country, working with their professors to form companies, primarily in the oncology space. Every once in a while, I would dip my toe in orthogonal areas, glaucoma being an example. There was a kinase target that a company was developing, and kinases are traditional cancer targets. So I would look for non-cancer opportunities where the signaling pathways were associated with cancer, and that was my comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And so Osage still exists today. They're now investing out of their third fund, which is a $325 million fund. And it was a great formative training experience for me.
Yeah, that bio, your early bio chops, is that? Did you find that to be common? Like in the, you were young, you were new to the VC space. Were there other young, new to the VC space venture capitalists who came from the bio space, or was that sort of unique? And how did it sort of inform your time as a venture capitalist?
Yeah, what I learned is basically there were two phenotypes in venture capital. So one was traditional researchers, and that could have been an MD, a PhD, or an MD, PhD. And then there were business folks, so MBAs, and they typically had consulting backgrounds. Mm-hmm. And at Osage, and I think at most funds, what they would basically do is have the business and science people tag team on deals. So you'd have someone with a strong science background, someone with a strong business background, and they would work together on the investment opportunities. And that way you have a full perspective on the business. And so I think my background was very traditional for entry into the analyst stage. And so typically, you'd have two entry points in the venture capital, one being the analyst stage, so still early career development, and then the other being very late stage career where, you're a SVP at Roche and a venture fund recruits you as a partner to come in because you have the gravitas experience Rolodex. And so, yeah, it was a very traditional entry point, and then had the opportunity to grow with the fund, but realized over the years that I was forming these companies, we would work on them and then we would set them on their way. And I really wanted to follow one through not just the initial investment, but the growth of that company. And I thought the best way to do that was to leave and pursue a company on my own.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good segue. I was looking back through, I was looking through some old issues of Life Science Leader in prep for our conversation. And I wanted to ask you about this because in 2018, you wrote a column. The headline was "My Life as a Recovering VC, Zigging Where Others Zag." And I found it to be a very transparent, like I read it and I was like, wow, like you and I hadn't met, but I thought, man, I'm really excited about talking to this guy because it was very transparent. It was an honest assessment of what you were doing in the VC world and what you wanted to do next. And I appreciate that. So one, yeah, thanks for bearing your soul in that column. I would say that anyone who, anyone who's interested in that career trajectory would benefit from reading that column. It was, I don't remember what issue it was, but it was 2018 Life Science Leader. But tell us about that. I want to learn a little bit more about that transition from VC to operating, as a co-founder and CEO of a startup biopharma. What experiences? I know you served on some boards through the VC experience. I guess what experiences from that time sort of really were the catalyst for, you turning the corner and saying, look, I want to go do this.
Yeah. So the way, well, thank you for reading the article. The way I view my career development and still today is it's a perpetual race to grow my knowledge base, to grow as a leader, to grow as a colleague. And at the venture capital fund, I felt like my growth was being stunted. Had nothing to do with the fund itself, but it is inherently the venture model. And so in venture, in some sense, you start doing the same thing every day. You look for deals, invest in them, you sit on the board. And that is a fantastic learning experience. But I felt like it was, rinse, wash, repeat. And then the other part that was more concerning to me was a sense of schadenfreude when I was sitting on these boards. I was a very young guy. I'm still a young guy, sitting on boards with very experienced professionals who had long histories as pharmaceutical executives, as operators of small companies. These are people who had been there, done that. When the CEO said, I have problem XYZ, these individuals had lived that problem. I had never done any of that before. I had no idea what it was like to be a CEO or even a junior member of a startup or emerging company, let alone a large pharmaceutical company. Yeah. I felt like there was this blind side to my ability as an investor. How could I make very smart investment decisions about companies that I didn't fundamentally understand? And so that really started to eat at me. I became less comfortable in my own skin and wanted to see what it was like to operate. And so spoke to a number of actually the CEOs that I worked with, I served on the board with, and they all felt similarly that the board members that they valued the most were the ones who were former CEOs, who they could have honest, frank conversations with, who would provide good, balanced feedback and mentorship to them. And so they really encouraged me to do that. And so I felt like if I'm going to leave, let's do something where it is most consistent with my skill set. So having spent my career in oncology in solid tumors, really, I was interested in starting Context. The other areas, I do have a family history of breast and ovarian cancer. And so if I was going to pick an area to invest my career and time into, I'd want to do it in something that can help not only my family, but also a large group of women. And given the prevalence of breast, ovarian, and endometrial cancer, anyone who is viewing this podcast will be either directly or 1 or 2 degrees separated from someone who either had that disease or currently has it. And so I thought, what a great way to spend the next 1 to 10 plus years of my career. And so that was the genesis of Context. And as I stand today, 5 years in, it was clear as an investor, I had no idea what I was doing. That running companies is incredibly complex, not just operationally, but working with other people. And when you're in venture capital, you typically work with incredibly high functioning type A people with incredible academic pedigrees. They're self-motivated. When you get into a broader work experience, people have a variety of backgrounds, skill sets, ages, ethnicities, races, educational backgrounds, and are not necessarily self-motivated. So how do I, as a younger CEO, a first-time CEO, get all of those people together, work on the same page? And I think those are much more of the daily travails of the CEO that I had no appreciation for in those board meetings. And I'm incredibly thankful that through this experience to open my eyes to all that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's incredible. So it takes guts, as I said, it takes guts to recognize what you don't want to be doing. And it takes a whole different set of guts to step out and do what you do what you do want.
Harder conversation with my wife about, hey, I think I'm going to be partner in a year and make X amount of dollars, and I'm going to leave away. And we're going to go on your teacher salary for a year. How about it, wife? And I'm fortunate she was incredibly supportive. And thank you to the Philadelphia School District for my healthcare during that time.
that's yeah. Giving thanks where thanks is due. And definite shout out to your wife. I took a leap, a similar leap a few years back when I left the publishing industry for a little while, and I remember those conversations well, Marty. So kudos to both of you. So yeah, I want to shift gears and start talking about Context a little bit. And you already started to talk a little bit about the motivation for the indications that you're pursuing. You're focused on women's health, as I said, therapies for hormone-driven breast and gynecological cancers. And you touched on the fact that these are prevalent diseases that affect at some point affect if not directly, indirectly, just about everyone. But tell us a little bit more about that, the unmet need and what that business opportunity looks like for Context.
Absolutely. So as you're probably aware, many, literally hundreds of thousands of women each year are diagnosed with an aggregate breast, ovarian, and endometrial cancer. So it's this incredibly large funnel. And for 90+% of those women, the disease is caught relatively early, either through mammography or as women's going to their yearly OBGYN visit. Those cancers are caught early. They get preventive surgery, may or may not get chemotherapy and radiation. And for the vast majority of those patients, they're cured. Their cancer will never come back. The problem is, because that funnel is huge, you get a small percentage of patients years later relapsing. And because a small percentage of those patients relapse each year, all of a sudden you have this aggregate pool of over 150,000 women with recurrent breast, ovarian, endometrial. And recurrent cancer means the cancer's back. It is no longer in the original site, so it's metastatic. And at that point, for those diseases, unfortunately, for hormone-driven breast, ovarian, endometrial, which is the largest part of the market, there are currently no cures. So when the cancer's back, it's all about defining a treatment scheme for them to extend their lives and provide them with the highest quality of life you can. Mm-hmm. What that means from a treatment standpoint is we have really good initial treatments for those patients. In some cases, treatments with very few side effects. And so patients can be on those drugs, depending on those cancers, for months or years or the rest of their lives. However, once you progress, meaning the cancer starts growing again, the toolkit for oncologists is basically very sparse. And so while there are drugs available, they're not particularly good, and they do carry, in most cases, very significant side effects. And so as a company, that's where we want to focus right now. And that second, third relapse with new treatments that meet a medical unmet need for those patients. Ultimately, we want our drugs to be used earlier and ultimately as preventative therapies so that the cancer never comes back. But we think in that recurrent metastatic setting, there's a tremendous opportunity. And it feels awkward to say that, right? Because tremendous opportunity is kind of a business term. It's a tremendous opportunity because there's that many women suffering with those cancers. And so again, what we aim to do as a company and our mission is to advance medicines for female cancers. And the way we do that is extend the life of those patients and give them a high quality of life. So they're able to play tennis, go on walks. When they walk down the street, they are what I would refer to as silent suffering. So they have the cancer, it's an inner fight, but you don't see any skin discolorations, loss of hair. They're able to go about their daily life as best as possible. And that's really hard for most women with those cancers right now.
Sure.
The interesting part is many of those cancers were historically thought of as Western cancers. So in the United States, Canada, Western Europe, what we've seen is as a Western diet has been adopted globally, the prevalence of these cancers in Asia, Eastern Europe, and elsewhere is now starting to match the US and Western Europe. So it is a global problem. As the population ages, the market and the number of patients with these cancers is growing. And so we really do think the time is now to do as much good as possible for these patients.
Yeah. Yeah. And it appears as though you come into the equation. So you pull context together and you choose to go after this indication. And totally understood on the opportunity. I referenced it as a market opportunity as well. Business term, but it's an opportunity to address.
It makes you feel cold, right? It's a weird way of saying it.
I know. And it's a line that we walk all. It's a business of biotech podcast, right? Like we walk that line all the time, but I think it goes without saying, since I've entered this space, Marty, I've interviewed, I don't know, a couple hundred, founders of biopharma companies, many of them MDs and PhDs who have been in medicine their entire lives. And I can say with 100% confidence that altruism and patient outcomes drive everything that they do. Like I don't have any qualms about that at all. Like I get that. So, but recognizing this opportunity, getting back to context, recognizing this opportunity to meet this global need. What was the approach from the outside? Because when I look at the company, I see, you appear to be sort of modality agnostic, like to a degree. You don't come at it like, oh, we're going to go, change the world with monoclonal antibodies, and that's all we're going to build. You at least, as I said, appear to be open to, whatever modality fits the specific need. So tell me about that. Like, what's been the company's philosophy around what therapies it chooses to develop and why?
It's a fantastic question, and it's core to our business strategy and in some sense our scientific strategy. Context is a small company. We went public in October of 2021. And so we don't have, and while we do have a nice amount of capital right now and a long runway, we don't have the capital to compete with a Merck or a Pfizer. And so as a small company, you have to pick and choose your battles. And as we thought about that, we thought one of the ways that we could differentiate and compete is to pick drug targets that were challenging. So targets that had some sort of impediment that if we were successful in drugging that target, we could be first or second in market. And so by picking things that are hard, we would differentiate and not have to worry as much as a company normally would about large pharma. And so in the case of our first program, our oral progesterone receptor antagonist, the drug is the only known full antagonist of the progesterone receptor. Or so to say it differently, it's the most complete inhibitor of the target that, to our knowledge, has ever been discovered. And so that's kind of the first mover advantage that we're looking for. And there's pros and cons for that. The pro is in success, you can potentially own the market. The challenge that we've found acutely at times is being the only one or being one of two. It's very hard for investors to frame the financial potential for that program. And as you mentioned, we are in the business of helping patients, but we need money to do that. And so if investors don't know how to value your program, if there's other programs that are out there that they're unable to benchmark you against, that can make things challenging. And so, I think as we step back, being the only one is great, and we really want to be in a market where maybe there's one or two other players. And so as we brought in our second program, our Claudin-6 bispecific, we refined that strategy. Mm-hmm. So Claudin-6 is a fantastically interesting protein. It's what's referred to as an oncofetal protein, meaning that it's expressed in developing fetus, but upon adolescence and later adult life, it's absent from normal tissue. Interesting enough, it pops its ugly head in ovarian and endometrial cancer. So it's an ideal cancer target because it's only expressed on cancer cells in adults. The problem is it's very hard to develop an antibody against the target. And so we were able to acquire what we really do think is the most selective Claudin-6 antibody that has ever been publicly disclosed. And then we subsequently convert that into a bispecific format. And so the idea is to bring immune cells in close proximity to cancer cells to kill them. What was important about that program is currently we're in third place. There's two companies that are more mature than us in the Claudin-6 race. There's Xencor, which is a little bit ahead of us, and then BioNTech, which just published the first human data targeting Claudin-6 at the JP Morgan conference of 2022. And there they showed a 40% response rate against solid tumors with their CAR-T approach, which is a little bit different than bispecific as far as how it's administered and the cost of therapy. But that was the first clinical proof of concept for that program. And so what we learned from our progesterone targeting program is it's better to have at least one and hopefully two competitors. People then can benchmark how you look relative to them. They can ascribe evaluation to those companies and ascribe one to your program. And so as we think about the future, we want to focus on challenging targets. And I think given the receptivity to bispecifics and the potential they hold, probably we want to go deeper into bispecifics. We've gained a lot of knowledge in that area. And we think that's an area where we can become really experts in over time.
When you're striving to excel in a new arena, the best guides are the ones already doing it well. The business of biotech brings those voices forward to help new and emerging biopharmas turn their innovations, like mRNA and cell and gene therapies, into clinical realities. Tune in and subscribe for insights on hiring, regulatory, and other need-to-know topics for biopharma leaders. The podcast is brought to you in collaboration with Cytiva. Check out their resources at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. That's CYTIVA.com/emerging biotech. Yeah. So that's super interesting, and I totally see it. Not only the benchmarking, but certainly there's momentum. In many industries, you look at a situation where you acknowledge that you're third on the development cycle, um, and that's a problem. But in this space, I've learned that in a lot of cases that creates momentum, that helps the third place company build its approach. And I want to get into some specifics about that approach and some of the specific sort of differentiators that context purports to have around speed and efficiency. Um, but before I do that, I just want to get some flavor for what it means as a leader of the company to move from a lead program that's decidedly small molecule inhibitor to a bispecific antibody. What did you have to do as the leader of the company from an organizational, HR, intellectual property standpoint, whichever of those you think is the most important, to pivot and to be able to embrace the pursuit of development of a modality that wasn't previously on your radar? Is the question clear? Like, does that make sense?
Oh, for sure. I mean, we live it every day. So we're a small company. We have a finite number of people. And so if you were a large pharma, you'd have your small molecule teams, you'd have your biologics teams. In some cases, they would overlap. But it is a challenge for us. So there are certain areas like regulatory where you can balance between the two groups. But for quality assurance, for CMC, for highly technical areas, we don't have people who can do both. And so you have to backfill with consultants or really encourage your existing employees to potentially learn a new area, which is a great opportunity for them, but also they're learning while developing a really important drug for you. And there's challenges associated with that. So that's an area, I think you hit the nail on the head. We don't have a good solution right now. In some cases, we are solving that with internal headcount and retraining. In other cases, we're bringing in consultants. I think over time, as the programs mature and we most likely have a greater emphasis on biologics and bispecifics, you can kind of centralize your HR processes to make it focus there. But it's, in full candor, definitely an area of growing pains, but one of opportunity for us. So I think most of us are excited about having two different modalities that we're working on right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to talk, I've got a lot on my agenda with you today, Marty. I want to talk a little bit about your clinical trial approach and the internalization of that. But similarly, manufacturing. I mean, you're phase two on phase two on your two lead candidates. Is that correct?
We are phase two on our lead, correct?
Yeah. Okay. What are the intentions at this point from a manufacturing standpoint? Will you be developing in-house manufacturing capacity, or are you looking to outsource that when the time comes, or is it too early to say?
Yeah, so for what we want and the breadth of the clinical program, it really wouldn't be cost efficient for us to develop our own facility. I think there's some great CDMOs out there. Mm-hmm. In particular, there's a couple that are experts in steroid chemistry. So our lead program, Anapristone extended release, which we also call ONA XR, it's a tablet, but it's a chemical structure that's a steroid based. And so basically partnering with those CDMOs that have the existing infrastructure and know-how has been really advantageous to our company. And so for the foreseeable future, we will outsource that. And it's worked out really well for us to date.
Cool. Okay. So you mentioned a couple of competitive entities in the space, Xencor and BioNTech. And I've noticed as I've read up on context that two of the, I guess, overarching marketing speak, if you will, differentiators the company purports to have are speed and cost efficiency. So I guess I would back up a little bit and ask you a more general question. As you survey your go forward path, what competitive differentiators in terms of, speed speed of development, speed of process, speed of manufacturing down the road, the clinical approach. Where is your, I guess, where's your competitive differentiation now? Is it speed? Is it cost efficiency? And if so, how?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we really have focused on is just knowing who we are and being really comfortable with that. I had maybe 2 years in venture capital before the economic downturn hit in '08 and '09. And that downturn had a fundamental impact on me as a person and my investing style. And so as I thought about context, capital efficiency was always going to be super important. And so I felt as a company, my background and then also what emerging companies do typically really well is late preclinical through phase 2. And that's an area where you can be incredibly capital efficient. You do not need a huge team because you're not doing in-house discovery. So you don't need research labs, you don't need all the infrastructure. And you're trying to partner prior to phase 3. So you don't need that pre-commercial and commercial infrastructure. So by focusing on preclinical through phase 2, you can have a small, dynamic, nimble team. You can externalize a lot of the heavy CapEx requirements of a company. And it's a scalable model where you can plug and play programs over time. So that's hard for some people. Some people want to develop a drug from cradle to the grave. They're excited about discovery. Others are excited about commercial. In our case, could that emerge over time? Everything's always, a possibility. But by focusing on what we know well, we can achieve really nice economies of scale. Are we doing things better, faster, cheaper? We think so. I think a lot of companies think that, to be frank. But I think we've come up with some really creative clinical collaborations with academic institutions around large CRO-like investigator-initiated trials. Those have worked really well for us, generated a lot of really exciting data. And then in the case of manufacturing, we partnered with a Chinese company called Tyligan Biosciences, which is a fascinating emerging biotech company started by former US-based Eli Lilly executives. And so they really had a lot of expertise in steroid chemistry and were able to help us refine our manufacturing route, really drive down the COGS and also the time to manufacture our drug, and help us source an appropriate CDMO and get favorable pricing for that. So I think we've done a lot of things right. We've certainly, made errors along the way and pivots. But I think knowing who we are and being comfortable in our skin has been exceedingly helpful, and I think will ultimately pay significant dividends for our programs and investors over time.
Mm-hmm. The we, knowing who we are. Another sort of ill-formed question I'm going to throw at you around that. So, knowing who we are, like, who you are, you just described it, like, your intent, where you started, where you'd like to take this thing. And you referenced the fact that, partnership is going to be the goal at some point. And of course, everything's subject to change. But at this point, as you're building a team and kind of moving the team forward as the leader of the team, is it challenging at all or at times to I guess maintain that cohesive vision for knowing who you are and where you want to take this thing versus, is there any, I'm not asking you to, necessarily air your dirty laundry, but is there ever any conflict there around, like, hey man, let's take this thing, let's run the ball down the field, like, versus, look, this is what we're designed to do. And when we do that thing, perhaps we'll grab another ball and take it downfield too. And to the point that we find, that we see fit, like, we're not necessarily going anywhere, but again, ill-formed question. I'm just curious about, like, your mindset around that.
The way I would describe it, right? We're a family, and imagine goes on vacation and you ask everyone what they want to do today, and you'll get a bunch of different answers and opinions based upon prior experience.
Right.
That's a pharmaceutical executive team. And so my goal is to create cohesion around the vision and the execution, and then make that consistent with the board and the board mandate and their fiduciary responsibility. But it's not easy because everyone has different experiences, different takes. They may hear about their friend's company that just sold or did something, and that's the thought of the day. And so the challenge for me, and one of the things that I focus on as relates to self-improvement, is to keep everyone on the same page and make them feel good about being on the same page, and making feel like their views are valued, even though we're all keeping aligned to that strategic vision. And that's really, really hard. And you know, as you noted, it's easy to see the shiny object and try to pick it up and run with it. But that's very hard as a small company. So mission creep is always a concern. Mm-hmm. And I think something that you have to keep an eye out for, because it just, you know, it's like breadcrumbs. You just need a little bit each day, and you know, your vision's totally out of whack, and you need to get it back online.
Yeah, for sure. I referenced the clinical trials approach. So tell me about your take on investigator-sponsored trials versus outsourcing to CROs. What's Context doing there, and why?
Yeah, so for us, prior to going IPO, and even really post IPO, to generate all of the phase 2 data that we wanted, it's 4 clinical trials, it would have been cost prohibitive to work with CROs, or even to do it themselves. That would have been tens and tens of millions of dollars. By partnering with academic institutions, we were able to save a tremendous amount of money, with the hope of generating the same amount and the same quality of clinical data. And now that we're a couple years in, I would say that's mostly held true. We anticipated that the trials from an enrollment standpoint would be a bell curve, you know, so you'd have one trial that would enroll exceedingly well, 2 that would sort of hit their marks, and 1 that would be the problem child. And that would be the same if we were working with CROs or doing it ourselves, right? So you're doing 4 trials, that's usually what happens. And that's been the case. What we did find during the first year of COVID was a significant slowdown in the trials. Patients were reluctant to go in. We saw massive turnover in the research, really it's the research support staff. So nurses, budgeting, so financial types associated with trials, and legal. To get the patients in the trial. And so that certainly slowed things down. But I think different from other companies outside of oncology, if patients don't get the treatment, they can potentially die. And so we were enrolling patients throughout COVID, but certainly there were challenges there that were not foreseen. We are getting to the point though now as a company, particularly with the new financing, where we are in the position to initiate company-sponsored trials. And so that's something we're really critically thinking about this year. Is there a trial we want to start ourselves that could add incremental data to further underwrite phase 3 development and the potential for our lead drug? And so that's absolutely something on the table for us.
Yeah, okay. Another question I wanted to ask you about is your involvement in the greater industries and organizations, organizations within and associations within the greater life sciences industry. So you work with organizations like BioBreak and Life Science Cares. As I mentioned, you're an active member of the Life Science Leader Editorial Advisory Board. Tell us about that. Why are you involved in these organizations? Why is it important to you? What's I don't know. I shouldn't ask what the benefit is. You know, it's not all about benefiting Martin Lehr, but it's important nonetheless. Obviously, for you to you commit your time and your resources and energy to it. What's the deal there?
Yeah, it stems from really my parents and family, that I've had a very fortunate life. And continued to as a CEO of a biotech company, particularly at a young age. And so the family view and my personal view is always, we have a duty to pay it forward. And so it is in many sense for me, an obligation, but a very happy one that I jump in with both feet, because at the end of the day, the reason that I do it is it makes me happy. So there, as you noted, there's a variety of activities I'm involved with. BioBreak started with a friend, Jeff Meyerson of Locust Walk Partners, with the goal of bringing together life science executives, particularly for me in the Philadelphia region, as a means of economic development. So if you get executives together, they'll talk about what they're doing. They may talk about new companies. Those companies are created and they employ more people, and particularly in downtown Philadelphia. So the idea, can we use BioBreak to make a biotech ecosystem in Philly, which benefits all Philadelphians in the life science community? It creates jobs for the next generation. It creates STEM opportunity for students. And then creates a community of peers, which is tremendous. The other groups that I'm involved with is Life Science Cares. Life Science Cares was started by Rob Perez. Most of you may know Rob from his time as CEO of Cubis Pharmaceuticals. Rob started Life Science Cares in Boston a handful of years ago as a means for life science executives to give back to the communities that did so much for them in helping support their companies. So what we do is raise capital. I'm a part of the group in Philadelphia. We raise capital from life science executives and their companies. We then invest that capital in between 6 and 10 charities per year, a heavy emphasis on STEM and workforce training to create the next generation of employees at biotech companies, with an emphasis on those individuals who may only have a GED or no high school degree, and give them the workforce training needed to secure a good job. And then I'm on the board of Cure Duchenne. Cure Duchenne is a venture philanthropy. So we make equity investments in biotech companies as a means to induce them to develop treatments for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And I have a family connection to Duchenne. I lost a brother 15 years ago to Duchenne. So for me, it's just tremendous to invest in these companies and to see the treatments come forward. So we were one of the original investors in Sarepta, and have made a number of fascinating investments, to the point where that group is thinking no longer of just developing treatments for the disease, but now that the boys are living longer, what sort of investments can we make to help with debilitating symptoms that would exist in these boys who are now, instead of living in their early 20s, in their 30s and 40s, and they're productive professionals, and also quality of life opportunities for them. So tremendous organization. And then, of course, on the board of Life Science Cares. And that's been a wonderful experience connecting with other life science executives and talking about the industry in ways that we can build bonds and bridges within it. So time is finite, but I like how I'm spending my time right now. I'm sure my wife has quibbles of how much time I allocate to things, but certainly the extracurriculars are one of the most fun things in my life, and things I look forward to.
Yeah. And it's exemplary, and I'm sure it's been challenging, especially, organizations like BioBreak through the pandemic. It's probably been challenging to kind of facilitate and maintain momentum, but kudos to you for continuing.
You hit the nail on that. Very hard to do networking virtually.
Yeah.
We figured it out sort of, but it's been
and
bumpy.
As far as your wife is concerned, and any any quibble she may have with you over the way that you're spending your time, you can always lean back on the whole "I'm fighting. My life is dedicated to fighting for women's health" thing. Like you've got that feather in your cap with her. It's like an ace in the hole, right? I mean, it's inarguable. You can't argue with that, honey.
Well, and it's a great point. So one of the things we try to do at the company, and more broadly, is to incorporate our families into these activities, for them to understand, what it means to have these diseases, why my company and other companies are critically important to developing the next generation of technologies, so that these diseases that are afflicting families other than our own can be remedied. And it's hard for people to understand what other people are going through on a day-to-day basis when you're dealing with these diseases, whether they're acute or chronic diseases. And so I think that's something that's been very helpful, or at least I perceive it to be helpful. I'm not sure my wife has ever definitively said one way or the other, but I think it's one of the great ways of building community, of including your family in what you do.
Yeah, for sure. And the work you're doing both, in terms of context and extracurricularly, I can't think of a better way to, one, honor women, and two, honor your brother. I mean, that's wonderful work as well. So
thank you. It's been fun.
Yeah. Anything else you wanted to talk about, Marty? Anything that I gave short shrift on that you wanted to kick around today?
No, this has been exceedingly fun. Would have loved to do it in person, but I bring that point where people are going to start getting together again. So I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm humbled by your interest in the company and myself.
No, it's absolutely been fun. Great to get to know you, and we will do it in person. We're on opposite corners of the state, but not too far. So we'll make a point of it once travel frees up a little bit more. Maybe once the weather up here breaks a little bit, we'll take a trip down to Philly and do it in person for sure.
Forward to it.
Thanks for joining me, Marty. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So that's Context Therapeutics founder and CEO Marty Lehr. I'm Matt Pillar, and this is The Business of Biotech. We're produced by Bioprocess Online in partnership with Cytiva, which demonstrates its commitment to new and emerging biopharma at cytivalifesciences.com/emerging biotech. Check that out. Visit us at bioprocessonline.com and sign up for my newsletter while you're there. And if you're enjoying The Business of Biotech, please subscribe, review, and give us your feedback. In the meantime, thanks for listening.